Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the February 2021 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook of For Support and Extension of the Cuban Revolution by J. Posadas from 1960. If you like this video, please click the like button and the subscribe button, and consider supporting us on Patreon. Thanks as usual to the Marxists Internet Archive at marxists.org for hosting this file and thousands of other files for free related to socialism. So this file is part of a series that we started last month here on the channel. We do one or two texts every month in the series we call Posadism in One Playlist. What is Posadism? Posadism is a branch of Trotskyism founded by Argentine Trotskyists using the pseudonym J. Posadas, or occasionally Juan Posadas. Mainly this is Homero Romulo Cristalli Fresnelli. The name was also used by Dante Minazzoli. They started out as a voice of mainline Trotskyism in South America. However, at some point, which we'll be discovering and elucidating here as we read through the texts, J. Posadas took on some rather controversial and unusual positions related to nuclear war, UFOs, and these have kind of taken on a sort of mystique and become a point of fascination. Anyway, if it gets more people to learn about some aspects of socialism, so be it, and we're going to put it up on the channel, albeit with the disclaimer that these are not mainstream views. Now, what is Trotskyism? Trotskyism is the supporters of Leon Trotsky. Trotsky is a major figure within Marxism-Leninism, or at least post-Lenin Marxism. Leon Trotsky having been a revolutionary who worked closely with Lenin in the founding of the Soviet Union, the Russian Revolution of 1917, etc. When Stalin rose to power, Trotsky fell out, moved out of the Soviet Union, became a leading international Marxist voice of anti-Stalinism. While I personally think that there is a lot to criticize about the way that Stalin ruled the USSR and changes made under Stalin, I can't say that I particularly find Trotskyism to be an appealing sect within Marxism, which I do believe meets the very fundamental definition of sectarianism, which is not working with people with whom you do not have a fundamental disagreement. You're just sort of refusing to work with them. Additionally, Stalin died a very, very long time ago, like 2 or 3 generations, depending on how you're counting a generation. And socialism has a lot more pressing questions than rehashing whether Trotsky was wronged or not for the next century or so. So with that as context, we're going to move into the audiobook, which is from the 4th International, Amsterdam, number 10, summer 1960, marked up by Ynda O'Callaghan for the Encyclopedia of Trotskyism Online. Let's get into the audiobook. The Cuban Revolution is passing through steadily increasing danger. Imperialism, particularly Yankee imperialism, is increasing military, economic, and political pressure. The Church has joined the campaign, and the front of the Curia, imperialism, Batistism, and the oligarchy operates coordinatedly under a single direction. It conceals itself behind the mask of an anti-communist front, but its purpose is not to combat the Communist Party, for this party has very scant influence on the Cuban masses, but rather to assemble all sectors who feel that the revolution, under the pressure of the masses, is going forward to measures whereby the workers more openly intervene in and control government policy, trying to spur it on to revolutionary anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist positions, since, despite the leadership's hesitations, fears, and raising of obstacles, the masses tend to seek the revolutionary channel toward measures of this sort. Until lately, there existed sectors of Yankee imperialism, of the North American press, that still believed in the possibility of containing the revolution by crushing the will and steadily increasing combativity of the Cuban masses, and thereby containing the Cuban government's policy and measures. But these sectors are now declaring that they have given up hope, and that Cuba is heading for, quote, communism. Under the pressure of masses unwilling to remain passive, the government is inclining to carry out a foreign policy of agreements, of commercial and even diplomatic relations with the worker states. The invitations to Khrushchev and to either Mao Zedong or Zhou Enlai, really invitations to the worker states as such, strike at and worry imperialism. Independently of the limited scope assigned to these measures by the Cuban government, they spur the Cuban and Latin American masses to seek their natural alliance with the workers' states and the worldwide colonial revolution, i.e. the Cuban government's support of the Algerian Revolution, to defend their own revolution and emerge from economic and commercial difficulties. Dorticos Tour. Cuban President Dorticos, on his recent tour, sought to obtain the support and understanding of the Latin American governments and bourgeoisies, and also to spur and encourage support of the masses for the Cuban Revolution. The result spoke volumes. The governments were frightened lest Dorticos' presence should influence their own masses, whose hatred for imperialism is deep and intense. All these governments tried in one way or another to impede, neutralize, and even sabotage Dorticos' trip, and especially his contact with the masses. By their inconsiderate behavior toward him, the governments showed their fear of contamination by the Cuban Revolution, and demonstrated to Yankee imperialism that they were on its side. No Latin American government, save perhaps the Mexican, will take a stand in support of the revolutionary democratic rights of the Cuban masses to follow the course of their revolutionary life as they wish, and are doing, and support their government against imperialism's attempts to overthrow it. Venezuela and Colombia are really two bridgeheads against the Cuban Revolution. Betancourt's attitude toward Dorticos was revelatory. Yankee imperialism is waiting for the opportunity to swap Santo Domingo for Cuba, to yield to the popular hatred of the Dominican dictatorship, to obtain from the Latin American governments the offsetting support for invading or sabotaging Cuba, for besieging it economically, socially, and politically. Despite imperialist might, Latin American governments, under immense mass pressure, fear to show open support to Wall Street's proposals. But the furious campaign of Latin America's democratic press, air quotes, against the Cuban government and people is only a beginning, which will later move on to the economic, political, and military fields. The Cuban Revolution and the world and Latin American masses. It is owing to the anti-imperialist hatred of the Latin American masses that their governments and imperialism have not gone even farther against the Cuban Revolution. Imperialism is steadily losing the petty bourgeois social support it could until recently count on. All over Latin America, to varying degrees, e.g. Paraguay, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, the masses are effectively fighting against bourgeoisies and oligarchies to expel imperialism and dictatorships. When their struggle reaches an open anti-oligarchic level, it is carried out, quote, in the Cuban way. The masses sense that this is the really fruitful way to achieve solution of economic and social problems, agrarian reform, industrialization, and democratic rights. It is the Cuban way that the masses in Korea, Turkey, and Japan have taken to expel imperialism, to fight against war and atomic armament, to defend democratic rights and social progress, the only way to fight for their own human dignity. The Latin American bourgeoisies, as we have seen, are ready to obey imperialism in its plans against the Cuban Revolution and the revolutionary movements of the masses in Latin America and throughout the world. But the Latin American masses, on the contrary, will continue to fight for their own just-mentioned goals, and the outlook is good that their struggles will grow stronger and their revolution will advance. In Chile, the striking coal miners, despite terrible pressure from the consequences of the earthquakes, collapse of their houses, deaths of their families, and loss of everything they possessed, have refused to return to work if their demands are not met. In Bolivia, where the Paz Estenssoro slate won the elections, there was enormous abstentionism and blank ballots. The reactionary and pro-imperialist right, led by Guevara Arza, got many votes, as did the ultra-rightist Falange. An important factor of the petty bourgeoisie, of well-to-do peasants, and of newly well-to-do peasants, also a backward sector, voted for Guevara. The votes for Paz Estenssoro, Lechen, were only half the votes obtained by the MNR in previous elections, showing a deep crisis in the MNR. Important sectors of the petty bourgeoisie and the peasantry are breaking away from the MNR, and Guevara and the Falange will tend to attract them on the basis of the Bolivian economic crisis. It is possible to foresee new and graver attempts at coups d'etat, at uprisings by the MNR right wing, Guevara, and at a united front led by Guevara against the Paz-Lechen government. The overwhelming majority of the worker and peasant masses and the poor sectors of the petty bourgeoisie who voted for the Paz-Lechin ticket were really voting for Lechin. Lechin will knuckle under to Paz, but in voting for him, the masses were seeking a way to safeguard their conquests, to defend the nationalizations and extend the agrarian reform. Paz Estensoro has no way out other than to follow along general lines the policy of Sile Suazo. This will bring him into more open clashes with the masses, who will bring pressure on Lechin to go forward, basing himself more openly on the COB, the Bolivian Confederation of Labor, the Miners' Federation, and the peasants. For this purpose, the workers and peasants will rely on their own class organizations. Hence it is to be foreseen that, either as their answer to attempts at coups d'etat or on their own initiative, the Bolivian masses will tend to spur on the process, renewing it, quote, in the Cuban way. The development of the struggles in Bolivia will soon raise the need for the Bolivian and Cuban masses to support each other mutually against imperialism. Dependence of the Cuban Revolution on the world and Latin American masses. The Cuban Revolution, government, unions, and masses must openly seek the support of the Latin American and world masses. The Cuban government can expect nothing from the capitalist governments of Latin America. On the contrary, it can and must count on the masses of Latin America and the world, appeal to them, connect up the extension and elevation of the Cuban Revolution with the world revolution in general, and the Latin American Revolution in particular. Those masses, plus the workers' states, have prevented Yankee imperialism and the Latin American governments from crushing the Cuban Revolution. Economic problems and unemployment are weighing, and will continue to weigh on the Cuban Revolution. The oil problem speaks for itself. Imperialism will step up economic and trade sabotage, while it is preparing military invasion or an internal uprising combined therewith. These attempts would be supported by the capitalist forces that in most cases continue overwhelmingly dominant in the ownership of land, telephones, electric light and power, transportation, etc. Dependent on the capitalist structure of the country, they are the basis for counter-revolution. The Cuban Revolution's first measure of self-defense must be more advanced expropriation of imperialist and Cuban-owned properties of national interest, nationalizing them and putting them under workers' control, planning nationalization and combined production in the national interest, in conformance with the people's needs in nourishment, employment, and supportive living standards, combined with export, trade exchanges, and industrialization, calling when necessary on technicians, professional men, and scientists from the whole world, and especially from Latin America, to collaborate in forwarding the Cuban Revolution, increasing cultural, economic, and scientific ties and exchanges with the workers' states, recognizing them all, People's China, East Germany, etc., recognizing the government of the National Liberation Front in Algeria and giving it public and direct support, calling on the Bolivian and other Latin American governments to insist on propaganda for and preparation of the Conference of Underdeveloped States, but to carry it out on the basis of a program made clear to the masses, of liberation from imperialism and increase in the participation and control of the masses in the economy and the government, calling for the establishment of a raw materials pool and of joint purchasing in the name of all the countries of Latin America. The trade unions, the masses, and the Cuban Revolution. It is the masses who are the basis for a real support of the Cuban Revolution. The Cuban Labor Federation should appeal directly, agitate, and send members on tours through all Latin American countries to call for the organization of an anti-imperialist unified front on the basis of agrarian reform and the expulsion of imperialism. It should call for a proletarian united front to fight for workers' and peasants' governments. It and its component unions should call on the masses of North America to fight for a program in defense of the right of the peoples of Latin America to struggle against imperialism. There exists an agreement among the labor federations of Cuba, Venezuela, Chile, and Bolivia, and between the student centers of Cuba and Argentina, etc., to defend the Cuban and Bolivian revolutions. These agreements must not remain mere resolutions. These organisms must function permanently, with a regular leadership that calls meetings and mobilizations and convokes a Latin American Congress for the Latin American people's national and social liberation from imperialism and capitalism. This does not interest the leaders of the Peronists in Argentina, of the MNR in Bolivia, or the Acción Democrática in Venezuela, or of the communist parties anywhere, who all fear to lose control over the actions of the masses. The workers' control exercised by the printers of Cuba's capitalist newspapers should be extended to all the firms and factories inside and outside Cuba, for the experience of workers' control in Cuba and in Bolivia clearly shows the road by which the revolution must in practice go forward. In each country, the workers' organizations should declare that they join and support the Cuban Revolution, issue appeals to carry out manifestations, mobilizations, assemblies, meetings, and conferences in support of the action of the Cuban masses. The movement should discuss and learn from the experience of the action of the Cuban masses, their guerrilla, their present militia, and their struggle to the death against imperialism and for national and social liberation. The workers from the factories, the unions, and the neighborhoods should discuss and organize commissions for concrete aid to the Cuban Revolution, hold factory meetings to bring about a national congress of support and backing to the Cuban Revolution, organize commissions for sending brigades of armed militiamen to Cuba. The most important aid that can and must be put into practice in favor of the Cuban Revolution is the development of national anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist struggles, the organization of the Anti-Imperialist United Front, and the Anti-Capitalist United Front for the program of national and social liberation. A single Latin American labor federation is an urgent necessity. The conditions for creating it exist, but effective steps have to be taken. The Cuban Labor Federation, CTC, should take the initiative and organize the tasks, the appeals, the negotiations, and the measures for bringing about a Latin American conference for the creation of a single Latin American revolutionary worker and peasant federation on the basis of a program of national and social liberation. This would be one of the pillars of the defense and support of the Cuban Revolution. Such a single Latin American labor federation would have to include all workers' tendencies and rights to proportional representation on the basis of the revolutionary program for national and social liberation. Role of the Cuban working class. The Cuban working class must be in the first ranks in defense of its revolution against Yankee imperialism, in appeals to the workers, peasants, and poor petty bourgeois of Latin America and the world to unify the struggle to expel imperialism on the basis of revolutionary agrarian reform, and for the expropriation without indemnization of imperialism and industries of national interest. But it must do so directly and in a form independent of its own Cuban government. To support and defend the revolution at its present stage, it must be carried farther forward. To carry it forward, the expropriations of imperialism must be extended and deepened, and workers' control, the monopoly of foreign trade, the nationalization of banking, and the planning of the economy must be installed in a struggle for a workers' and peasants' government in Cuba. To carry the revolution through, the Cuban masses need their own political class instrument, a labor party based on the trade unions. But at the same time, there is needed the organization of the revolutionary Marxist, Trotskyist Party of the Fourth International. The recent explosion of a powder magazine shows that the counter-revolution, though without social forces, still has adequate means to make trouble. As long as the Cuban state remains capitalist, the counter-revolution, the Cuban oligarchy, the Batistists, Trujillo, and imperialism, will find the means for certain successes in its attempts. But if the masses intervene directly with their class organisms, it will be crushed and exterminated. The Cuban trade unions should fight to impose the direct military intervention of the labor movement in the form of people's militia. In case of any threat or danger, they can directly crush the counter-revolutionaries. The people in arms is the only guarantee of checking and crushing the counter-revolution. Recently, the Cuban government organized an army of students controlled and directed by the state. This is a step backward. The unions must fight to have the student militia organized within the same framework as the workers' militia, and under the control and direction of the trade unions. Student militia outside the control of the trade unions are at the present stage an embryo of a capitalist army, because the state and the structure of society in Cuba continue to be capitalist. The well-orchestrated campaign conducted by imperialism is immediately aimed at bringing pressure to paralyze the measures of expropriation and of diplomatic and trade relations with the worker states, etc. to crush the plans of concealment, sabotage, infamy, and slanders against the Cuban Revolution that are being carried on by imperialism and the Latin American bourgeoisies and governments, the masses must directly see and feel the independent class action, the appeals, the activity, and the action of the trade unions and the Cuban Labor Federation. These are what give the most confidence, have authority, and exert influence on the masses, not only the student masses, but the broad, enormous worker and peasant masses of all Latin America and the world. The defense and support of the Cuban Revolution lies in this, that it must spread, broaden its social, economic, and political conquests, and rely on the revolutionary masses of Latin America and of the world. The present moment, the objective conditions, and the prospects are all favorable from every point of view. Imperialism is revealing its weakness when faced by the revolutionary impetus of the masses of the world and by the advances of the workers' states. The Cuban Revolution must base itself on these objective and subjective conditions to go forward on the road of national and social liberation, the only way to maintain and defend itself. That's the end of the document, 28 June 1960. There is a footnote. It says, this article by Comrade Posadas, slightly shortened for full text see Voz Proletaria, fortnightly organ of the POR, Trotskyist of Argentina, was written before the latest developments in the Cuban Revolution referred to in the Declaration of the International Secretariat on page 70, the latest measures adopted by imperialism and its corporations, and the answers made to them by the Cuban government and masses fully confirm the line indicated in this article. I will also basically, that's the end of the document, fully confirm the line indicated in this article. This is, again, still early in the Posadas days, and before Posadism became a thing, independent of Trotskyism and the Fourth International. Everything in that sounded pretty sound to me, honestly, and, thankfully, the Cuban Revolution did succeed, is still succeeding. And, this was written 60 and a half years ago. That's quite a while ago. I think it's disappointing that the revolution didn't spread further. This is a major point within Trotskyism, the idea of the permanent revolution of literally as soon as you establish a socialist government in one country, just keep engaging in revolutionary activity and trying to spread it to more and more countries in order to sustain it. That's a contentious point. I mean, and I'm simplifying somewhat there. But this was a point of contention for Trotsky within the Soviet government back in the day. Trotskyists still apply this logic. Let me say, I personally, I like that idea. I like the idea that we should, never rest and that we should press on, because I do think that, in principle at least, none of us are safe until all of us are safe, until capitalism has been completely extinguished from the whole world and the bourgeoisie completely suppressed, and then, bourgeois relations completely eliminated all over the planet. Only then can we, really take socialism to the next level. I mean, to really, really develop it. When you're trying to maintain a military in a socialist country to defend against capitalist invasion, takedown, counter-revolution, we can see that after World War II, this was a major source of the downfall of the USSR, was that they were, and China today also, having to spend all this money on your military just to repel imperialist invasion. I mean, wouldn't it be easier if that imperialist country just didn't exist? You know what I mean? Wink, wink. Right. Keywords there in principle. Can you sustain it? Or will you wear yourself out in the process? Have we found that balance? I would say that with only 5 ML countries in the world, no, we have not found that balance. On the other hand, it occurs to me as I read this and think about this, did capitalism spread everywhere all at once? No, it spread in a few countries, in a fairly short period of time. and then more slowly to the rest of the world. It was an exceptionally violent process, though. I mean, the way by which capitalism spread, I would argue we can't spread socialism the same way. Capitalism was paying armies. I mean, it's not like the bourgeoisie, a tiny class, were going out and fighting all of these battles themselves for their own benefit. It's a major difference between, capitalism and the struggles when bourgeois revolutions, went beyond just the economic realm into the military ever, or any kind of like direct armed conflict with the older feudalist forces when the bourgeoisie was setting up its rule. You by and large had somebody else doing the fighting. I mean, the poor and working classes were still doing the fighting. In socialism, this is different. And we do have models developed. Mao wrote about People's War and guerrilla warfare, and we'll be doing a few texts related to that coming up soon, that work at least in some of the more backward countries that have never really been attempted in more advanced countries, at least not successfully. So how do we keep socialism moving forward? It's a huge question. Different branches within Marxism have different answers. I think it's a major one and a point of hope and optimism because it's an answerable question. There is an answer. There may be more than one answer to that question of working strategies moving socialism forward. I personally have a fair deal of optimism behind China's new Silk Road, Belt and Road project. I hear constant allegations that this is an imperialist project. I have seen no evidence to that effect. Please, I ask for evidence every time someone asserts that. What I see is China giving low-interest loans that are easily forgiven if countries can't pay them back. They're building an international infrastructure through developing countries that is a direct competitor and far less predatory, to the extent that it can be called predatory at all, than the U.S. IMF system. That is a hope for me of a sort of peaceful spread of socialist development and Chinese soft power. Plenty of people, including many Trotskyists I have interacted with, will tell me China's capitalist. It's not socialist. Even neoliberal, somebody said. Well, okay, if you want to say that a government that has 2/3 of its people are employed by the public sector is neoliberal, come on. Just seriously. At best, you want to criticize it, call it something realistic. Call it social democratic. I still find me a Western social democracy as we think of the welfare capitalist state that has 2/3 of the people employed by the state. But whatever. Whatever it is a competitor to U.S. imperialism, which is some of the most hellish shit you can imagine. Is it potentially a way forward for socialism? What do you think? Now we're way off the topic of Posadism. Leave me your comments, whether they're on Posadism or whatever the hell I'm talking about, below. We'll have a discussion. Should be interesting. And we will catch you in the next video. Thanks for listening. And that's the video. Thanks to our current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen or just support us financially, you can go to patreon.com/socialismforall and sign up for a monthly donation. You can also follow us at facebook.com/socialism4all. Used to have a page at FOR all, and it got throttled to death by Zuck. Here on YouTube, please click the like button, subscribe button, and the notifications bell. Please leave a comment if you can, and please share our video wherever you're online, your Twitter feed, your Discord servers, Reddit subs, etc. All of that helps more people to see this content, whether it's in the YouTube algorithm or just posting it on other sites. All of that's helpful. All of you out there supporting and promoting this content makes it all go that much more smoothly. We need to end capitalism, normalize talking about socialism today, and it's really kind of our only hope for a better tomorrow. Thanks for all you do, and we will catch you in the next video.